One day after China's decision to let the yuan strengthen, the currency is trading weaker. A surprise to some maybe, but not to Gary Shilling. Gary told us back in April that if anything, a free-floating yuan probably would weaken against the dollar. He's an independent economist who advises hedge fund manager John Paulson, and as Bloomberg Businessweek pointed out in a recent cover story, a contrarian who nailed all 13 of his investment guidelines for 2008, and boy was 2008 a tricky year. Gary is back with us here in New York this morning. Gary, I got to be fair to China. The yuan is not free-floating, but it's weakening today. Let me ask you this question, because you have been outspoken on China. Is the Chinese government, is the central bank, in your mind, making the wrong move here?
It probably is. They run a stop-go economic policy, and the last time they tried to slow things down was 2007. The timing couldn't have been worse because it came right on the eve of the '08 global recession. Now they're trying to slow things down, and letting the yuan go up against the dollar is part of that tightening move. They're worrying about inflation, but they're really trying to tighten down after all their massive stimulus last year, and the timing probably is going to be terrible because we're getting the Eurozone crisis spreading globally, and that may give us a sequel to what subprime mortgages did in '08.
A sequel to what subprime mortgages did. So how apocalyptic a vision should we have?
Well, it's not the end of the world, but I think it's mainly financial. It isn't so much in trade, although obviously if Europe is in weak conditions, they're not going to buy much of anything, including our exports. But the point is that U.S. banks have 48% of their global exposure, $1.5 trillion in the Eurozone plus the U.K. So there's a lot of involvement there, and I think we probably are going to end up with restructuring, meaning lower value on the debts, sovereign and private debts in Greece and probably Spain and a few other of the pigs.
Okay, because we've heard about, there's been so much talk about a potential restructuring in Greece. You're talking about a technical default, let's call it, by Spain, by Portugal, by other countries potentially.
Very, very well could be. It depends on how, and there are lots of ways that they sort of handle things. Like in the mid-'70s, New York City never technically went bankrupt, but it really was. It had to be bailed out by the state. They didn't meet the interest payments on their debt. There's a difference between technical default and actual default, but I think that's coming.
But how is this going to play out? Because I've heard that maybe some of the big banks in Germany and France are swapping the debt that they have of Greece, Spain, and Portugal with the ECB, so it all ends up sitting on the ECB's balance sheet. If that's the case, what's the scenario? Yeah,
and the suggestion is that the ECB should sell that, in effect, to this big fund, this backup fund that they have set up. The Greeks have actually proposed that. But that's what's going on, Eric, globally. It's a socialization of debt. It's taking it over by a government or by a super government agency.